I'm going to show you how I get the worship drum sound with stock plugins only from sounding like this to this. Okay, let's dive into the mix. So before I start mixing anything, I said this in my last video. If you want to go see it, how I did everything in third-party plugins, it's up here. But before I start mixing, is that I make sure that my hits are consistent with the drums and that everything is pretty solid on my part. And then after that, I start mixing. So what I did is that I created my own drum patch with third-party plugins and stock plugins like the one I'm going to show you, and all I have to do is just hit my drum patch and then drag my audio files into the drum patch, and then all my plugins are already there, set and ready to go, and I get an instant vibe instantly. And so if you want to pick it up, it's down in the description below. But other than that, let's get into the mix. So this is what the raw drums sound like. Pretty solid. And so what I do is that I'll just drag and drop my audio files into my preset patch, and then all my plugins are all set up and ready to go. So let's start off with the kick drum. So for the kick drum, I have the kick signal and then it's going into a bus. So let's look at the kick raw signal first. So the first plugin that I have is Logic's Vintage Console EQ, and I'm boosting quite a bit of highs, and I'm taking out around 300 hertz, just taking out that wolfiness of the kick, and then I'm boosting around 120 hertz just to add some extra low end. And then what's cool about this plugin is that it has a drive input, and I'm using the smooth setting, the natural phase, not boosting any volume at all, but this is what it sounds like off, and then this is with it engaged. If you notice, it's adding some top end and bringing some low end and then taking out some of those mids. And then the next thing after that, I just like to do another cleanup EQ. This is just Logic's channel EQ, and I'm taking out 124 hertz. Just there was a little bit of wolfiness that I wasn't liking out of the kick drum, either though I was boosting it in the other one, I was taking it out, just cleaning it up just a little bit on this one in the full mix, and then taking out 200 hertz and then boosting around 5k or 6k basically, and then boosting around 65 hertz, just trying to get some more low end out of the kick. So this is with it off, and this is with it on. Just cleaning it up and boosting some lows. And then the next thing that I like to do is using the compressor, and I'm using their vintage FET compressor, and I'm just using their preset rock kick, and then I think I changed the threshold or the knee, and this is what the curve looks like. I believe it's like kind of like a soft knee, but this is with it off, and then this is with it on. I'm trying to get extra punch and sustain from the kick. Yeah, it's just adding a little more extra punch. And then I'm using Logic's multi-pressor, which is just like a multi-compressor. I use usually the Waves C6 multi-band compression or the low control, and this one does great. All I'm doing for it is that I'm just boosting around 60 hertz and just controlling that. And so this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Notice that it'll add some low end to it. And it looks like I'm controlling a little bit of the mids as well, but yeah, love it. And then the next thing that I'm using is Logic's expander, and I just found this just at random, and it's kind of like a saturation, and from what I'm hearing, it's kind of like a saturation plugin. And the preset that I'm using is just the crisp up preset, and I didn't change anything about it. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. It feels like it's adding gain, but it's not, but it's also adding extra punch. It may be just me, but it sounds great in the mix. And then on the actual channel, I have an exciter, and this I found at random too. So I think this is like a distortion or something like that, or just like a clipper. I'm not sure, but I just like it, and I just threw it on there. And so I'm doing the preset, the add silver. I think I added a little bit more harmonics to it, but this is with it off, and this is with it on. It adds a little extra top end and punch. Yeah, love it. So that's it for the kick. Now let's move on to the snare. So for the snare, I'm using a top mic and bottom mic, and then I'll take both of those sends and then turn it into a bus. So let's look at the individual channels right now. So let's start with the snare top mic. So for the snare top, I am first using a vintage console NQ. Usually I like to use a gate for the snare, but the snare that I'm using is my Crotch bell brass snare, and I really don't have to use a gate on this that much, just because I'm already getting a loud sound out of the snare to where I'm not having to push my input, to where I'm not getting that much bleed out of the microphone. And the microphone I'm using is just a 57 on there on top and bottom. And so for the EQ, I'm boosting a ton of highs, and then I am taking out around 300 hertz, just taking out some of that wolfiness. And then I am boosting 220 hertz, just trying to get some punch out of the snare. And then I'm also using their drive input, and I'm using the smooth setting. So this is with it off. That's just the raw snare, and then this is with the EQ on it. Nice. I'm getting a nice smack and top end out of there. You can hear that there's quite a bit of bleed, and I could add a multipressor on it or just a gate, but I just didn't want to in this mix because I'm just trying to get a vibe out of it. And so after that vintage EQ, I am using a cleanup EQ, and that's just their regular channel EQ, and I am boosting 160 hertz, just trying to get more of that low end out of the snare, taking out 60 hertz, just trying to control that low end muddiness. And then I am taking out around 430 hertz because I heard a ring that I didn't like, and then taking out some wolfiness from 765 hertz. So this is with it off, and this is with it on. Nice, getting a nice smack out of it. And then the next thing that I'm using is their compressor, and I'm using the Rock snare top preset, and I'm using the vintage opto compressor, because I think originally it was the vintage FET compressor, but I just changed it over to the opto compressor. And as you can see right here, I'm doing a threshold of -30, doing a kind of a medium knee, and then medium attack and quick release and all that. So this is with it on, or this is with it off. And this is with it on. If you notice that it's adding some attack or some like punch to it, and also that ring is just extending that ring a little bit. So this is with it off again, and then here's the ring. It's just bringing that ring just up just a little bit. And then after that, I'm using the expander, and I'm using the same preset as I used on the kick, just the crisp up preset, just to add some beef to it. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. I don't know what it does. It just cleans it up a ton. I love it. Now let's move on to the snare bottom. So for the snare bottom, the first thing that I had to do is that I threw on a gain channel, but I'm not adding any gain to it. I'm just flipping the phase because, you know, you gotta make sure that your snare is in phase. So make sure your snare is in phase. And then the next thing I'm doing is just the vintage console EQ. I'm adding quite a bit of a top end to it. I'm adding some 4.5K just to add some extra smack or some like buzz to it. And then I am using, or I'm adding lows, 220 hertz, just adding a hint of that. And then I turned off the drive just because it was adding too much attack to it, because I don't want too much attack from my bottom snare. I just want snare buzz, if that makes sense. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Let me show you again. This is with it off, and this is with it on. Nice, getting a nice buzz out of that bottom snare, and also just not that much attack. And then I'm doing a cleanup EQ, and I'm just taking out just 120 hertz, just trying to get rid of that kick drum that's in there. Like I said, I could use a gate, but I just chose not to. And then I'm taking out just a little bit. I'm using a wide Q, but taking out around 400 hertz, just taking out more of that muddiness, and then taking down some of that cymbal noise around 10K. And so this is with it off, and this is with it on. It's taming those low frequencies, and then also taming those high frequencies to where I'm able to focus just on that snare buzz. So after that, I like to use a multi-compressor, and I am taking out a ton of the low mids just so I can get rid of that actual attack from the snare, because when all I want is just to focus on the buzz of the bottom snare, but still have some body to it. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Notice how I'm just focusing on that snare buzz instead of that actual stick hit. And yeah, that's what I'm doing for that. And then the next thing that I'm doing is a compressor, and I am just using their vintage FET compressor. And then you can see from my graph, I'm doing a hard knee and then doing a fast attack and a fast release, just trying to control that initial hit from the snare. And you can see my settings right here. You can copy them if you want, but this is with it off, and this is with it on. Just taking out that initial attack from the snare or from the stick, and then just having that buzz. And then this is with both of them blended together. Love it. And then I'll just take both of those signals and then just transfer them into a single bus. And then for the bus, I am using the exciter, and I'm just adding their add silver preset, and same harmonics as the kick, just 150 plus harmonics. And it's just adding some top end, some beef, and just some excitement. It's almost like I don't know what it is. It just adds some vibes to it. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Do it again. Love it. It's also, I don't know, it's kind of like a pressing it. I don't know what it's doing. It's doing some magical stuff. And then with the snare, I'm adding 2 reverbs. So for the first reverb I am adding is I believe a space reverb, but it's a space reverb, but it's a gate reverb. And so for that, I'm just using their hard studio preset, the 0.8 second preset, and then I turned up the wet all the way. And then I'm not sure if I changed anything on these presets, but feel free to take a screenshot and keep these settings. And so this is with it off, and then this is with it on. If you can hear, it's just adding it's like a room reverb almost, but it just adds some extra sustain to the snare. Love it. And then the next thing that I'm doing is a big snare reverb. And for this genre, I like to use a big reverb for the snare, just so it's able to add some ambience but not too much reverb. Just sounds soloed, it's going to sound a little too much, but in the context of a mix, it's going to sound just right. Just sets it right in the mix. So I'm using the Space Designer reverb, and I'm using their 4.4 second big plate preset. Turn the wet all the way up and then the dry all the way down. And then I'm not sure if I changed anything. I think I may have changed the size, but the size is 55%. And so this is the snare with it off, and then this is with it on. It's gonna be a little too much, but trust me, in the mix it sounds just right. Love it. So yeah, that's a big reverb right there. And so that's it for the snare. Now let's move on to the toms. So for the toms, I like to do two different things. If I'm not using a gate, what I'll normally do is that I'll take the wave files, and then where I'm only hitting the toms is where I'll splice the wave file and then just keep those hits in the mix, and then I'll just turn the rest of, as you can see, the rest of the waves, just mute them. But you can also throw a gate on there. I'm not using a gate, but you can. But this is what I just like to do just for in this mix. And so this is what the top tom sounds like. Sounds pretty weak, but it's a good recording. So the first thing that I like to do, the first thing that I like to do is I like to pan my toms to where my high tom's gonna be over here to the left a little bit, and then my floor tom's gonna be over here to the right of me, just to where it's a drummer's perspective. And so yeah, the first plugin that I like to use is the Vintage Console EQ. I am boosting a ton of highs, like all the highs I can get, just so I can get that initial attack from the stick. And then I am boosting around 4.6K, around 4.5, what I normally do, and then just boosting that just a little bit. Also boosting 220 hertz, just adding some low end. And then I'm using their drive setting, but I'm just doing the smooth setting on here. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. As you can tell, you can hear a lot of that cymbal bleed in there, but we're getting that initial attack from the tom. Sweet. And so the next thing that I like to do is a cleanup EQ. What I'm doing here is that I'm just taking out around 70 hertz, just taking out some of that low end rumble that I don't want. You're going to see that I'm going to add it back, but it's going to be in a good context, trust me. And so I'm boosting 123 hertz, just adding some low end to it. Taking out 228 hertz, I heard a little bit of a whoom in there that I didn't like, and so I just took it out just a little bit. And then I'm taking out a ton of 800 hertz, but using a wide Q, just taking out that wolfiness out of the tom. And then I'm just boosting around 6K, just adding some extra top end, but I'm already boosting it enough in the previous EQ. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. It's just cleaning it up a ton. Love it. Then the next thing that I like to do is compressor. And I think I'm just using their tom preset, and which is just the vintage FET. I always turn off the auto gain, just so you know, with these compressors, always turn off the auto gain. So yeah, the graph right here, you can see the knee and everything. Pretty fast attack, fast release, fast release. And this is what it sounds like off, and this is what it sounds like on. I'm trying to get extra attack and mainly sustain, so check that out. You see how it's just adding, it's just bringing all those transients and just kind of squishing it a little bit, but it sounds great in my ears. So then the next thing that I was doing is that I added another EQ, and you can always do this, or if you don't want to, in the mix that it just needed it. So I just added 120 hertz because that compressor was already taking out those that frequency down, and so I was just bringing it back up. And then the next thing I'm doing is a multipressor, and I'm just boosting those lows. I'm boosting around 80 hertz, just adding some low end to my top tom just to make it sound bigger and beefier. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Sounds really nice, and it's also controlling those really low frequencies. And so let's move on to the floor tom. So for the floor tom, I'm using the vintage console EQ, boosting as much highs as I can get, taking out a ton of 600 to 700 hertz, just taking out that wolfiness that I don't want. And then I'm boosting 220 hertz, just adding a little bit of low end, using their drive setting and using the smooth one, not doing anything with the low cut on any of these. And so this is with it off. Just sounds like a flat pancake. And then this is with it on. Yeah, just adding that top end and that low punch. So the next thing I'm doing is clean up EQ, just taking out 40 hertz, you know, and then just adding 70 hertz, just adding some low end to it, taking out 150 hertz just because I was hearing some low rumble that I wasn't liking, just out of that. And then taking out some 3.5K, I was hearing a little bit of a or something. It's hard to explain, but I was hearing it in the mix and I just took it out. And then I'm just boosting 7.5K, around 8K, what I normally do. And so this is with it off, and then this is with it on. As you notice with the EQ, it's just tightening everything up. And then the next thing that I'm doing is a compressor. Compressor I'm using is the Vintage FET, just using the same tom comp. I don't think I changed anything, maybe just the threshold a little bit and the knee, I'm not sure. I think I may have changed the ratio. This is what it sounds like off. And then this is with it on. I tried to just glue everything together and then try to get some more sustain out of the floor tom. As you can tell, it's doing a lot of processing. It's not, some people may say it's over processing it, but to me it's not, because it's just gluing everything together. So the next thing I'm doing is the expander. And I'm using their setting, the more punch, didn't change anything else, and so I'm just getting extra punch out of it, like it says. This is with it off, and then this is with it on. Just adding that extra punch that I want. And then the next thing after that is that I'm using the multipressor, and I'm just boosting some lows, I think around 120 hertz, and controlling the lows just to add some extra low end to the floor tom. So this is with it off, and this is with it on. Just adding some extra rumble. Okay, so then what I like to do is that I like to take my top tom and my floor tom and put them into a summing group, and then just do some extra stuff on there. So this is what the bus, I have nothing on there except for a room reverb. So for toms, I've noticed that some recordings that they'll have their toms really dry, and I really like to add them to a room reverb. And I'm not using any room mics in here unless I would just boost that up just a little bit. But yeah, I just use their room reverb. So let's check out the room reverb. So the room reverb that I'm using is the Space Designer, and I'm using their 1 second bright chamber, and I'm bringing down the dry, bringing up the wet a ton. And I'm not sure if I changed any of the size. If so, it's just to 100%. I just did it to taste, just to where it sounds like an actual natural drum room. And so this is what the toms sound like with the reverb off. It just sounds really dry and just no depth at all. And then when you add the room reverb to it, it just brings so much character and life to it. Oh, just adds so much. I love it. And so that's what I'm doing for the toms. Now let's move on to the overheads. So for the overheads, what I'm doing, it might be different with what you're using for your overheads microphone. My overheads microphone that I'm using is the Cascade Fatheads, and they are ribbon microphones. And so ribbon microphones are normally warm, like really warm, compared to like just normal overheads, our condenser, and so they're going to be a little bit more brighter than ribbon microphones. And so my EQ moves on here are going to be for those ribbon microphones, and so you might not add so much brightness to it, but yeah, I'm just going to show you what I use for the EQ. And so what I do with my stereo pair of overheads is that I'll take the left and the right channel and sum that into a summing track, which is, you know, a bus, and then I'll just EQ and do everything all together in that one bus. But I also like to just throw on an EQ just on the individual channels as well. And so and I'll do the same thing on each one to where they're both the same, because if not, then you'll start getting some phase issues. And so with the EQ on each of the tracks, this is what it looks like with the EQ. So this is the overheads with just raw. It's really dark, let me tell you. And then this is with both of the EQs on the individual channel, both of them on. Just taking out that low rumble. I'm just taking out around 120 hertz, bringing down that snare hit around 600 hertz, but nothing else, just cleaning up just the initial hits. And so on the actual bus channel, I am doing all the magic right there. And so the first thing that I'm doing is that I'm using the vintage console EQ, adding a ton of brightness. And like I said, these are ribbon microphones. As you heard, they're super dark, so I'm adding a ton of top end. And so if you're using condensers, you might not want to add that much. And so for the mids, I'm boosting around 6K, just adding some more top into it. And then I'm boosting around 220 hertz just to bring some life to that kick drum a little bit. And so this is with it off. And this is with it on. As you can tell, it's just bringing those cymbals to life, and they just sound super smooth. That's why I love ribbon microphones. Then the next thing I'm doing is that I'm doing some cleanup EQ, bringing down that kick drum at 180 hertz, also bringing down the snare at 250 hertz, and then just boosting around, let's see, 6.5K. And this is with it off. And this is with it on. Nice, love it. And then the next thing that I'm doing is that I'm using the compressor, and I didn't want to over compress my overheads, just because that if you start over compressing overheads, there will be some swirliness in there, and that's what we don't want. We just want some sustain out of our cymbal hits and just some controlled dynamics. And so I'm just using the Rock Overheads preset, which is just the vintage FET compressor. You can see from my graph right here from how soft the knee is. The ratio is a 2-to-1. Attack is like a medium attack, a slow release. And so this is what it sounds like off. And then this is with it on. I want you to listen to the initial hits of the cymbals. There will be a little extra sustain. Nice, I love it. You notice that there's no swirliness, and we're getting extra sustain out of our cymbals. And so that's it for the overheads. So let's move on to the hi-hat. For the hi-hat, I really didn't hit it that much, but I'm gonna still show you the EQ moves that I normally use. And for the hi-hat, I like to pan it a little bit to the left, you know, drummer's perspective. And yeah, let's give it a listen. you notice I'm getting a lot of bleed, but with this EQ moves, we're going to tame that a little bit. So the first thing that I like to do is just a channel EQ, taking out a ton of low end. So taking out around close to 300 hertz, and then I'm taking out some low mids around 400 hertz, and then I'm taking out around 790 to 800 hertz, just taking out a lot of that kick and snare sound. And then I'm just boosting a little bit around 7.5K. It's really just adding some top end to it. And so this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Just cleaning it up a ton. It's kind of taking out a lot of the character of the hi-hat, but I was just using it just as like a splash or an accent symbol. And so the next thing I like to do is a console EQ, and then I'm just boosting a little bit top end from the hi-hats, and then I'm not doing anything with the mids at all, and then I'm not doing anything with the lows. I'm just adding some top end, and then I'm using their drive setting, the smooth setting. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Just adding a little bit of air to it. And then the next thing I'm doing is a compressor. I'm using the rock overhead setting because, again, I didn't want any swirliness out of the hi-hat, and so I think the graph is a little bit different. It's a little bit of a harder knee and a fast attack, medium slow release. I'm doing a 3-to-1 ratio, and this is what it sounds like, or with it off, and then this is with it on. Just taming that initial hit to where it's not like jumping out at you when you hit it. It's just, oh, okay, we're just hitting the cymbal. There we go. And so that's what I do for my hi-hats. Now let's go over to the accent microphone, or the little extra. I'm using a crotch mic. And so when I normally do a crotch mic is that I'm normally wanting to just add punch and character to my kick and snare and toms, but mainly just the kick and snare. It just adds like some extra beef to everything, some extra punch. And so this is with it raw. As you can tell, you're getting a ton of top end from the snare and from the kick, just a ton. And I'm only using a 57 on there, which is crazy cool. And so the first thing that I did was a channel EQ, taking out some lows around 180 hertz, and then bringing down 3K, just trying to take out those harsh hits out of that. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. As you can tell, it just cleaned it up a ton. And then the next thing that I'm using is a compressor, and I'm using their drum room preset, which is the vintage FET compressor. The thing I'm using, my knee is at 0.6. My ratio is at a 20 because I'm just wanting this just to smack. And then fast attack, fast release, and the threshold is at -30. And yeah, this is with it off. And then this is with it on. As you can notice, when I turn it on, it's gonna compress those initial attack hits to where everything's pretty squashed and even. And yeah, it's just gluing it together, and then just kind of like just crunching it a little bit. So this is with it on. It's crazy how that snare, it just adds a little bit of sustain to the snare too, and it's adding a little extra drive to it. So yeah, that's what I'm using with that. And then I'm using the expander, just adding the more punch preset. Not sure what it's doing, but it's doing something, and I like it. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Just adding some top end and some, I don't know, just some punch, like it says, more punch. And so I'm using that, and then I am also using a overdrive plugin on here, and I'm using their clean drive setting. I believe I turned up the drive just all the way, the tone at 6,300, bringing down the output gain, and this is really just adding some extra crunch, like how I normally do with the decapitator. This is what it's doing. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. I notice it's taking out some highs, but it's just adding some character to it, which I love. And so that's it for the crotch mic. And so what I'll do is that I'll take all those individual buses or the individual channels, and then I'll just create it into a drum bus. And then let's take a look at the drum bus. So for the drum bus, what I'm doing is that I am just adding a limiter to it, just to hold those transients from like the kick and the snare to where everything's pretty level. So this is with it off, and then this is with it on. Love it. And so for the main drum bus, what I'm doing is that I'm doing two different things. I'm doing a parallel compressor, and then I'm also using a drum room reverb just to add some character to it. So for the parallel compression, I'm using the compressor, and I'm just using their preset classic drums, and I believe it was on the vintage FET compressor, but I've started changing it up, and I use the classic VCA, and I'm just using just like a normal, just like moves, you know, just doing the ratio at 30-to-1, just smacking it a ton, just to add some extra beef to it. And you can tell from the curve and everything that's a pretty soft knee and everything, but it's smacking it a ton. So this is with the compressor off, and then this is with it on. Just adding a ton of punch from just the overall drums, from the kick and the snare and the toms. And so the next thing that I like to do is just add a drum room reverb. Since I'm not using any room mics, this is the best thing that I can do. And I'm using their Space Designer, and it's just the 1 second bright chamber one. Just take out the dry, bring up the wet all the way. The size is at 100%, and it's just adding some extra character to it. Let me turn off the snare verb, and then just use that drum reverb. So this is with it off. Notice everything just feels like all close mic. And so check out this. This is gonna add some character and depth to the drums. Oh, it sounds so good. And then when you add the snare reverbs, it just sounds huge. Gosh, sounds so good. So if you want to know how I mix these drums in third-party plugins, make sure you click this video.